This is the 46 of 46 podcast Summit Sessions, where we'll talk all things Adirondack, backcountry, and beyond. From high peak stories and adventures to trail tips and tricks, we'll dive deep into the heart of these mountains and the people who passionately climb them. Adirondack maps and spruce traps, bushwhacks and backpacks. It's all here on the 46 of 46 Summit Sessions. Hello out there and welcome to a special fall edition of the Summit Sessions here on the 46 of 46 podcast. For many, fall means the changing of the seasons, colorful leaves, sweatshirts, warm campfires, pumpkin spice, and apple treats. For others, however, it means hunting season. And earlier in the year, you may remember I had fellow Adirondack podcaster and hunter Todd Waldron on to discuss all things hunting and conservation, where he dispelled many myths about hunting and hunters, and the episode, to my surprise, was met with great applause. And since hunting season is just days away, and I'm very excited about it, it seems appropriate. And after all, this is an outdoor show, and we're here to talk about how unique deer hunting is right here in the Adirondacks. I also suppose I shouldn't be surprised that so many hikers and Adirondack lovers also enjoy hunting as well. After all, hunting and hiking do have a lot in common. The outdoors, going deep in the woods, adventure, climbing mountains, interacting with nature. They're quite similar activities when you break it down. And if you go on Google and you look up whitetail deer hunting strategies, your search engine will yield thousands of results. The problem is, most of these articles you'll find are strategies coming from places where big bucks roam in flat, farm-heavy, cornfield-type areas around the Midwest. However, when it comes to buck hunting here in the remote, rugged, dismal wilderness that is the Adirondack Park, those Midwestern tactics may not always be useful for hunting here in the mountains. My guest tonight is here to tell us just how much effort, backcountry miles, cold days, and how many mountains must be climbed to harvest a mature buck here in the ADK. And even if you're not a hunter, I'm willing to bet your respect for Adirondack hunters and the length they have to go through to get a deer will raise dramatically. Anybody who has climbed the hiking trails here know how tough this land can be even on a marked trail, but it's even tougher for hunters off trail. My guest tonight is author and ADK native Todd Mead. Todd has hunted the Adirondacks his whole life, harvested tons of big bucks, and has written multiple books including Backcountry Bucks and A Lifetime of Big Woods Hunting Memories, where he retells many Adirondack hunting stories. Todd is here tonight to talk all about Adirondack mountain hunting, off-trail navigation, and what it's like going deep into the Adirondack backcountry in search of deer. Todd, welcome to the 46 of 46 podcast, and thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit, maybe about mountains and a little bit about deer.
Oh, I think we'll talk a lot about both, but the pleasure's all mine. Thanks for coming on. And so bow season opens up on Monday. I imagine you're getting quite antsy to get into the woods right now for that.
To be honest, if I were, say, 30 years younger, I'd be really antsy. But right now, with all the bugs in the woods, I can kind of take my time, I think.
Okay, cool. So are you going to go out there for bow season, or is it going to be more of a kind of a game time decision each day if you decide to go out?
As I've gotten older, I've tried to hunt a little bit smarter. So I kind of pick and choose my days. But
Sure.
The first day of the season, I'm going out with a good friend of mine who is in a wheelchair. And he has the hashtag crawl to hunt. And we're going to go out and see if we can get him a shot at a deer.
Oh, very cool. All right. Hashtag crawl to hunt. That's cool. Tell me more about that. So, I mean, what are the obviously that's going to, create a challenge all in itself. So how have you figured out, where you're going to go, and how'd you plan that hunt?
Well, it's my friend Chris Hall, and he was able to walk just like you and me until he got into his, mid to late teens. And then he came down with something in his legs and he traveled all over the country. They flew him all over the country to try to figure out what it is, and they never figured it out. So he can stand, but he has to use a little bit of, he has to use help to stand, but he can't walk. So I met him. He joined the club that I'm in, and he was interested in competitive archery. And I saw him shooting competitive archery, so I decided that I would lend him a hand because I have a lot of experience in that. And I got him into shooting properly. And then my family owns a lot of land, and we're kind of right on the border of the Adirondack Park on the southern end near Lake George. So I have a couple places that are fairly easy for him to get in and out of. And, we've been seeing some deer there, and he and I are going to go give it a whirl on Monday night and see what happens.
All right. Very cool. That's awesome. So before we dive too much into hunting and, your stories and tactics, and let's tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? How'd you get into the outdoors? And then how did you wind up, writing multiple books about your outdoor experiences here in the Adirondacks?
I was born in Glens Falls, New York at the Glens Falls Hospital. And I grew up in a small town of Kingsbury, which is maybe, 10 miles out of Glens Falls. And it's right on the border of the Adirondack Park. And I pretty much, I went away to college, but I came home and I like this area because it has everything to offer. And in the process, my father's an outdoorsman, and he introduced me to the outdoors when I was a child. He never pushed me into doing anything. Just kind of introduced it to me and let me make my own choices. And I loved fishing when I was little, and I was always going to be a fisherman. But as time went by, I decided I would like to try hunting. So then I tried hunting, and that was kind of my introduction to the outdoors and what got me going in it.
Very cool. Very cool. And then eventually you had so many experiences, you put pen to paper and wrote multiple books. How'd that come about?
Yeah, I've written 3 books. They're all on hunting. And I guess what I did is I have a lot of friends, and they're like, you have a lot of experience in hunting. You have a lot of good stories, because I like to be a storyteller. And so then one of my good friends, Dan Ladd, who's the editor of the New York Outdoor News, he said to me one day, he says, you just need to sit down and write the book. That's the hardest part. He says, because you have the ability to write it. So just sit down and write it. So I decided I would take that project on, and I sat down. I think I wrote my first book in 3 weeks. And I decided if I sold a lot of copies of the first one, and I made my money back because it's a big investment, then I would write another one. So then it just kind of trickled down, and I just kept writing books because I kept making my money back. But now I'm taking a little bit of a break because it becomes a little time consuming at times.
Sure, a bit of a labor of love too at that point too, especially if you're just trying to make your money back. But it's kind of a good thing sometimes. You said you wrote the first book in 3 weeks. It's kind of good to just kind of just go for it and, not drag anything out like something like a book, and it turns out it worked out. So that's good. That's good to hear. Now, that first book was A Lifetime of Big Woods Hunting Memories. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then the second book was Backcountry Bucks.
Yeah. And basically all of those stories, and it's basically a collection of stories. And all of those stories, for the most part, are from hunts that I had with friends and family in the Adirondacks.
Yeah, that's great. So all you Adirondack fans, there's some Adirondack hunting literature for you to check out. And so, Todd, I know you're a big archery guy. You're a professional archer. You shoot in competitions nationwide. Would you consider yourself more of a bow hunter, or at one point in your life, or more of a rifle hunter, or you kind of go whichever part of the season it is? Do you have a soft spot for either of them in particular?
Yeah, well, I always tell people if my bow made the same noise that my gun does, then I would love bow hunting even more. But I don't really, I don't have a soft spot for anything. If I'm in the Adirondacks, there aren't too many deer, and you may have one opportunity in a season. So I would prefer to hunt with a gun in the Adirondacks. And if I'm going out of state, I almost always go out of state with a bow.
Sure, that makes sense. So, how did that come about? How did you become a professional archer? I've seen you on Instagram with a PSE jersey on, shooting in competitions. As someone myself who, my introduction to hunting was through archery, as a lot of people I feel like a lot of people tend to go that route, and that introduces them to it. So I have a real soft spot for the bow. How did that come about, becoming just a professional archer on those circuits?
That's a long story.
All right, you can give us the abridged version if you want, whichever you want.
I'll cut it short. When I started hunting when I was younger, like 13, 14, I tended to miss a lot of deer. So I wanted to get better, and I started shooting more archery, and then I went to archery 3D tournaments, and I just started shooting a lot of 3D tournaments. And then I thought I was pretty good, so I started shooting state tournaments, and then I won a few of those, and then I went to regional tournaments, and I did quite well there. So then I decided to try my hand at national tournaments, and then I did really well there. And then when I became what they call a senior, I just decided, well, I'll step into the professional ranks and I'll see what I got. So then I learned quickly that, shooting a bow is shooting a bow. Just go shoot your bow and see how you do against other people, and see how it works out. And I guess you could say I'm competitive. I'm a goal setter, and I'll work for anything that I think is achievable. And I've done all right. So, I mean, it's a lot of hard work, but if you want something bad enough, you'll put the work in to get it. It's kind of like climbing mountains. If you want to climb Mount Marcy, then, make your plan to climb it, and just do the right training and mentally prepare yourself, and you'll probably be able to do it if you put the work in.
Absolutely. No one's going to do the work for you. That's something I always talk about here on this podcast, because it's mostly typically about hiking, and hiking in the high peaks in particular. And, whenever somebody finishes their 46er journey, as I like to say, I like to always say, nobody's going to hike these mountains for you. And that's a good analogy for life. No one's going to do anything for you. You got to put the work in. And if you put the work in, you make a plan, it's pretty wild how far you can go. So I totally can relate to that thought process. But let's dive into the real nuances and the unique elements that hunters, and specifically buck hunters, have to deal with here in the Adirondacks. We just talked about Mount Marcy. Compared to most places in the country, given how rugged and just straight up wild the land is here in the Adirondacks, what elements do hunters here have to overcome that hunters who have never been here and don't have to hunt in a place like this might not quite grasp without coming here firsthand?
The Adirondack Park has a lot of different areas, as most of your listeners know. But if you're going to dive into, say, the high peaks area, then you better be able to navigate cross country on your own. Like, don't be relying on technology to get you where you want to go, because I was born and raised with a compass and a map. So I would say learning how to use a compass and a map is probably, something that you don't have to do in most other places. And, just kind of finding deer in places like the Adirondacks is much more difficult, just because there aren't too many deer. So to find the deer, you need to cover a lot of miles, and where they are on one day, they might not be there the next day. So it's kind of trusting your gut and going with your instincts. And if you follow the lay of the land, if you're on a mountain peak and you're looking down into, say, a valley that's sunken down between two mountains or whatever, it might be a pretty good area if there's, food and cover and water down there for the deer, because they're just like humans. They need the same things that humans need, food, water, and a place to sleep.
Sure. Now, I know you go to the Midwest pretty frequently to do some bow hunting. You've gotten some pretty big deer out there. What would you say is the big difference between, maybe the mindset? So, like, if you're having a conversation with hunters out there versus hunters here, what are some, differences you notice in maybe like the language, or just, the norms of the actual activity of deer hunting?
The difference between the biggest difference between the Midwest and back here is that out there you can observe deer because there are a lot of deer. So if you're able to observe deer, then you're